Juliana always believed her life would be simple, filled with love and happiness. She grew up in a small town surrounded by friends and family who adored her. At 25, she met Fernando, a charming and successful man who seemed to be the prince charming of her dreams. Fernando was everything Juliana had ever wanted in a man: kind, caring, and incredibly ambitious. They met at a mutual friend's wedding, where Fernando was instantly captivated by Juliana's warmth and vivacious spirit. Their connection was immediate, and within months, they were inseparable. Juliana's family, especially her Aunt Clara, were thrilled for her. Clara had always been a significant presence in Juliana's life, almost like a second mother. She had never married or had children of her own, so she poured all her love and attention into Juliana. As their relationship blossomed, Fernando proposed to Juliana in a grand, romantic gesture during a weekend getaway to a luxurious beach resort. With tears of joy in her eyes, Juliana said yes, feeling as though her life had become a fairy tale. Their wedding was a lavish affair, attended by friends and family from near and far. Clara, ever the supportive aunt, helped with every detail, ensuring that Juliana's special day was perfect. The ceremony was beautiful, and the reception was filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. After the wedding, Juliana and Fernando settled into a comfortable life. Fernando's career in finance was thriving, allowing them to live in a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood. Juliana, with her warm and nurturing personality, became a beloved figure in their social circle, often hosting gatherings and parties. Clara visited frequently, always bringing gifts and homemade treats. She and Fernando got along well, often sharing inside jokes and stories. Juliana felt blessed to have such a supportive family and a loving husband. Life seemed perfect, but underneath the surface, subtle cracks began to form. Fernando's job demanded long hours, and Juliana often found herself alone in their spacious home. Clara's visits became more frequent, and she started to notice the strain in Juliana's eyes. "Is everything all right, dear?" Clara would ask, her concern evident. Juliana always brushed it off, not wanting to worry her aunt. "I'm just tired, that's all. Fernando works so hard, and I want to support him." Clara nodded, but deep down, she sensed there was more to it. She started to pay closer attention, not only to Juliana but also to Fernando. She noticed the little things, the way Fernando would sometimes avoid eye contact, the slight tension in his voice when he talked about work. Despite these minor worries, Juliana and Fernando continued to appear as the perfect couple to those around them. Their love story was the envy of many, and Juliana often reminded herself of how lucky she was to have found such a wonderful man. But as time passed, the cracks grew deeper, and the foundation of their seemingly perfect life began to shake. Little did Juliana know, the seeds of betrayal had already been sown, and her world was about to be turned upside down in ways she could never have imagined. As the months rolled on, Juliana tried to ignore the creeping sense of unease that began to shadow her days. Fernando's work seemed to consume him entirely, and he often came home late, his demeanor tired and distracted. Despite her best efforts to remain supportive, Juliana couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She threw herself into various hobbies and social activities to fill the void left by Fernando's absence. She joined a local book club, took up painting, and even started a small garden in their backyard. Clara continued to visit regularly, always with a keen eye on Juliana's well-being. One sunny afternoon, Clara dropped by unannounced. Juliana was in the garden, tending to her blooming roses, when she heard her aunt's familiar voice calling from the gate. "Juliana, dear, you have quite the green thumb," Clara exclaimed as she walked in, her arms laden with a basket of freshly baked cookies. Juliana smiled, wiping the dirt from her hands. "Aunt Clara, what a lovely surprise. Come, sit with me. I've just made some iced tea." They settled on the patio, the sweet scent of roses mingling with the aroma of Clara's cookies. As they sipped their tea, Clara's eyes wandered to the empty chair beside Juliana. "Where's Fernando?" she asked casually. Juliana's smile faltered slightly. "He's at work, as usual." There's a big project he's been working on, and it's taking up all his time. Clara nodded, her expression thoughtful. He's been working late a lot lately, hasn't he? Juliana sighed, her shoulders slumping. Yes, he has. But he's doing it for us, for our future. I wish he didn't have to work so hard. Clara reached out and squeezed Juliana's hand. I know, dear. It's hard being alone so much. But you're strong, and you're doing a wonderful job of keeping things together. Juliana's eyes filled with tears, and she blinked them away quickly. Thank you, Aunt Clara. I just miss him, that's all. Clara's visits became even more frequent after that day, and she made it a point to keep Juliana busy and distracted. They planned weekend outings, shopped for new plants for the garden, and even started a small book club of their own. Clara's presence was a comforting balm to Juliana's loneliness, but it also made her more aware of the growing distance between her and Fernando. One evening, as Juliana was preparing dinner, she heard Fernando's car pull into the driveway. She glanced at the clock, it was earlier than usual. Hope sparked in her chest, and she hurried to the door to greet him. Fernando walked in, looking weary but managing a smile when he saw her. Hi, honey. Hi, love. You're home early. Juliana exclaimed, wrapping her arms around him. Fernando hugged her back, but she could feel the tension in his body. Yeah, I decided to leave the office a bit earlier today. Thought we could have dinner together. Juliana's heart swelled with happiness. That sounds wonderful. I've made your favorite, lasagna. They sat down to dinner, and for a while, it felt like old times. They talked about their days, laughed at shared memories, and enjoyed each other's company. But as the evening wore on, Juliana noticed Fernando becoming more distant, his gaze often drifting away as if he were lost in thought. Is everything all right, Fernando? She asked gently. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Yeah, just tired. It's been a long week. Juliana wanted to believe him, but the nagging doubt in her mind wouldn't let go. She decided not to press further, hoping that things would improve with time. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern continued. Fernando's late nights at work, his distracted demeanor, and Juliana's growing sense of isolation. Clara continued to be a constant presence, always offering a listening ear and a comforting shoulder to lean on. One afternoon, Clara arrived with a determined look in her eyes. Juliana, we need to talk. Juliana frowned, setting aside the book she was reading. What is it, Aunt Clara? Clara sat down beside her, taking Juliana's hands in hers. I've been thinking a lot about you and Fernando. I can't help but feel that something's not right. Have you talked to him about it? Juliana sighed, feeling the weight of her worries pressing down on her. I've tried, but he always says it's just work. I don't want to seem like I'm nagging or doubting him. Clara nodded, her expression serious. I understand, but you deserve to know what's going on. You can't keep living in uncertainty. Juliana knew Clara was right. She needed to have an honest conversation with Fernando, no matter how difficult it might be. That evening, when Fernando came home, Juliana steeled herself for the conversation she had been avoiding. Fernando, can we talk? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Fernando looked at her, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. Sure, what's on your mind? Juliana took a deep breath. I've been feeling really lonely lately. You're always working late, and I barely see you. I know your job is important, but I miss you, Fernando. I miss us. Fernando sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, Juliana. And I'm sorry. I don't want you to feel this way. I promise I'll try to be home more. Juliana felt a glimmer of hope. Thank you, Fernando. That's all I ask. They embraced, and for a moment, it felt like things might get better. But deep down, Juliana couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. She hoped that Fernando's promise would hold, but only time would tell if their love could withstand the unseen challenges ahead. Clara had always been an enigmatic figure in Juliana's life. To the outside world, she was the devoted aunt, a caring and loving woman who had devoted herself to her family. But deep within, Clara harbored a restless spirit and unspoken desires. She had spent her youth yearning for adventure and romance, but life had taken a different path. Now, watching Juliana's life unfold, Clara felt a mix of envy and longing. Clara often found herself lost in thought, reminiscing about the dreams she had once held. As Juliana's marriage with Fernando flourished, Clara couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between her niece's life and her own. Fernando was everything Clara had ever desired in a man, handsome, successful, and undeniably charming. Each visit to Juliana's home intensified Clara's feelings, stirring something deep within her that she had long tried to suppress. It started innocently enough. Clara would stay a bit longer after dinner, engaging Fernando in conversations about his work, his interests, and his aspirations. Fernando, always the gracious host, welcomed these discussions, often sharing stories and insights that left Clara captivated. She admired his intellect and drive, qualities she had always found irresistible. As the weeks went by, Clara's visits became more frequent. She found herself dressing a bit more carefully, choosing outfits that accentuated her figure, applying a touch more makeup. She told herself it was just to feel good about herself, but deep down, she knew she was trying to catch Fernando's eye. One evening, after a particularly engaging conversation with Fernando, Clara found herself unable to sleep. She lay in bed, her mind racing with thoughts of him. She imagined what it would be like to be in Juliana's shoes, to be the one Fernando looked at with admiration and love. The fantasies grew more vivid, and Clara felt a surge of desire she hadn't experienced in years. Clara's feelings for Fernando became an obsession. She began to notice every detail about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way he ran his fingers through his hair when he was deep in thought, the strength in his hands when he shook hers. She started to analyze every interaction, looking for signs that he might feel the same way about her. One afternoon, while Juliana was out running errands, Clara found herself alone with Fernando. They were sitting in the living room, the afternoon sun casting a warm glow through the windows. Clara seized the opportunity to delve deeper into Fernando's thoughts. "Fernando, do you ever feel like you're missing out on something?" she asked, her voice soft and probing. Fernando looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes. My work takes up so much of my time. There are days when I wish I could just escape and do something completely different." Clara leaned in slightly, her eyes locked on his. "And what would that be?" Fernando chuckled, a hint of wistfulness in his voice. "I don't know. Maybe travel the world, experience new cultures, live a little more freely." Clara's heart quickened. "You know, I've always felt the same way. There's so much out there, so much to experience. It's a shame we often get trapped in our routines." Fernando nodded, his gaze lingering on Clara's face. "It's true. We only have one life to live, after all." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The air between them felt charged, electric. She reached out, placing a hand on Fernando's arm. "It's never too late to chase those dreams, Fernando." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of Clara's words hanging in the air. Fernando looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up at her. Clara saw a flicker of something in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or maybe something more. Before the moment could escalate, Juliana's voice called out from the hallway. Clara quickly withdrew her hand, her heart pounding in her chest. Fernando stood up, his expression guarded once more. "Juliana's back," he said, his voice steady. "We should join her." Clara nodded, composing herself. But as they walked towards the kitchen, she couldn't help but replay the moment in her mind, over and over. She had seen something in Fernando's eyes, a spark that gave her hope. Over the next few days, Clara's thoughts became more conflicted. She knew what she was feeling was wrong, that betraying Juliana would be unforgivable. But the more time she spent around Fernando, the harder it became to resist the pull she felt towards him. One evening, Juliana invited Clara to stay for dinner again. As they sat around the table, Clara couldn't help but watch Fernando, her mind swirling with desire and guilt. She noticed how Juliana looked at him with such love and trust, and a pang of jealousy stabbed at her heart. After dinner, Juliana went to the kitchen to make coffee, leaving Clara and Fernando alone in the living room. Clara took a deep breath, deciding to take a risk. "Fernando," she began, her voice low and trembling, "there's something I need to tell you." Fernando looked at her, curiosity and concern in his eyes. "What is it, Clara?" Clara hesitated, her heart racing. I think I've developed feelings for you." Fernando's eyes widened in surprise, and he opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Clara continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it's wrong, and I hate myself for it. But I can't help how I feel. You're everything I've ever wanted in a man, and seeing you with Juliana, it's driving me crazy." Fernando stared at her, his expression unreadable. "Clara, Before he could finish, Juliana walked back into the room, carrying a tray with coffee cups. She glanced between Clara and Fernando, sensing the tension in the air. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Clara forced a smile, her heart pounding. "Yes, everything's fine. Just a bit of a heart-to-heart." Juliana smiled, setting the tray down on the coffee table. "I'm glad you two are getting along so well." As they sipped their coffee, Clara's mind raced with thoughts of what had just transpired. She knew she had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The seed of betrayal had been planted, and it was only a matter of time before it grew into something more. That night, as Clara lay in bed, she replayed the conversation over and over. She had seen the flicker of interest in Fernando's eyes, and she knew that despite his initial shock, there was a part of him that was intrigued by her confession. She wondered what the future held, and if Fernando would eventually succumb to the temptation that was slowly consuming them both. The stage was set, and the wheels of betrayal were in motion. Little did Juliana know, the very person she trusted the most was about to shatter her world, and the consequences of Clara's actions would be far-reaching and devastating. Clara couldn't stop thinking about her confession to Fernando. The guilt gnawed at her, but it was overshadowed by the thrill of the forbidden. She wondered what Fernando thought, if he was as conflicted as she was, or if he had dismissed her words as a momentary lapse in judgment. Days passed with a tense silence between them, both avoiding the topic but aware of the unspoken tension. One evening, Juliana mentioned she would be attending a charity event, something she had been involved with for weeks. Fernando assured her he would be fine at home, and Clara offered to help Juliana get ready. As they prepared for the event, Clara couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and dread. She knew that tonight, things might come to a head. After Juliana left, the house felt emptier than usual. Clara lingered, pretending to read a book, but her mind was elsewhere. Fernando was in his study, working late as usual. The hours ticked by slowly, the silence of the house growing heavier with each passing minute. Finally, Clara couldn't take it any longer. She walked to Fernando's study, her heart pounding. She knocked softly, and Fernando looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face. "Clara, what are you doing here?" he asked, setting his pen down. Clara took a deep breath, stepping into the room. "I wanted to talk about what I said the other night." Fernando's expression hardened slightly. "Clara, I don't think that's a good idea." Clara closed the door behind her, her eyes locking onto his. "Please, Fernando. Just hear me out." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "All right. What is it?" Clara walked over to him, her hands trembling. "I can't stop thinking about you. I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. And I think you feel something too." Fernando looked away, his jaw tightening. "Clara, this isn't right. You're Juliana's aunt. She's my wife." "I know," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "But I can't help how I feel. And I don't think you can either." Fernando stood up, running a hand through his hair. "This is madness, Clara. We can't do this." Clara took a step closer, her eyes pleading. But what if we already are? What if it's too late to stop? For a moment, they stood there, the tension between them palpable. Then, with a sudden movement, Fernando closed the distance between them, his lips crashing down on hers. Clara felt a surge of emotions, guilt, desire, and a forbidden thrill all mingling together. She responded with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck. They stumbled towards the couch, their kisses growing more passionate and desperate. Fernando's hands roamed over Clara's body, and she shivered under his touch. All rational thought fled, leaving only the raw, primal need for each other. As they fell onto the couch, Clara's mind raced with the enormity of what they were doing. But it was too late to stop now. Fernando's lips trailed down her neck, and she gasped, arching into him. The world outside ceased to exist, and all that mattered was the heat between them. Hours later, they lay entwined on the couch, the aftermath of their passion leaving a heavy silence in the room. Clara's head rested on Fernando's chest, her fingers tracing patterns on his skin. She felt a mixture of euphoria and dread, knowing that what they had done could never be undone. Fernando sighed, his arm tightening around her. This can't happen again, Clara. We can't let this destroy Juliana. Clara nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know. But I don't regret it. Fernando's expression softened, and he kissed her forehead. Neither do I. But we have to be careful. Clara closed her eyes, savoring the moment. She knew that their actions had set off a chain of events that would change everything. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The next morning, Clara left early, slipping out of the house before Juliana returned. She felt a pang of guilt, but it was overshadowed by the lingering touch of Fernando's hands and the memory of his kisses. She knew that they had to be careful, but she also knew that the desire between them was too strong to ignore. When Juliana returned, she found Fernando in the kitchen, making breakfast. She smiled, wrapping her arms around him. Good morning, love. Did you sleep well? Fernando forced a smile, kissing her cheek. Good morning, Juliana. Yes, I did. How was the event? It was wonderful. I can't wait to tell you all about it, Juliana said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. As they sat down to breakfast, Clara's absence was noted but not questioned. Juliana assumed she had left early for an appointment, and Fernando didn't offer any explanations. The day passed in a blur, the weight of their secret hanging over Fernando and Clara like a dark cloud. Over the next few days, Clara and Fernando continued their charade, pretending nothing had changed. But whenever they were alone, the tension between them was palpable. They exchanged lingering glances, stolen touches, and whispered words, each moment adding fuel to the fire that threatened to consume them. Finally, one evening, Clara could no longer bear the weight of their secret. She arranged to meet Fernando at a secluded spot in the park, away from prying eyes. As they walked together, the air was thick with unspoken words. Fernando, we need to talk, Clara said, her voice trembling. Fernando nodded, his expression serious. I know. This is getting out of hand. Clara stopped, turning to face him. I can't keep pretending everything is normal. Whatever this is between us, it's driving me crazy. Fernando sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, Clara. But what can we do? We can't hurt Juliana like this. Clara looked up at him, tears in her eyes. But we're already hurting her. Every lie, every secret, it's a betrayal. Fernando reached out, cupping her face in his hands. I know. And I hate myself for it. But I can't stop thinking about you, Clara. Clara leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. Then maybe we need to end this. Before it destroys us all. Fernando's hands dropped to his sides, and he stepped back. You're right. We can't keep doing this. As they walked back to their cars, the weight of their decision hung heavy in the air. But as they parted ways, both knew that the end of their affair was easier said than done. The bond between them was too strong, the desire too potent. And as they drove away, each felt a pang of longing, knowing that their forbidden love was far from over. Little did they know, the true consequences of their actions were yet to unfold. The seeds of betrayal had been sown, and it was only a matter of time before the truth would come to light, shattering the fragile facade of their lives and leaving devastation in its wake. The days following Clara and Fernando's decision to end their affair were filled with tension and unease. They tried to avoid being alone together, but the desire still lingered in stolen glances and fleeting touches. Juliana, blissfully unaware, continued her daily routine, trusting in the people she loved the most. One fateful evening, Juliana decided to surprise Fernando with a romantic dinner. She spent hours preparing his favorite dishes, excited to spend a quiet night together. She sent Clara a message, inviting her to join them later for dessert. Juliana wanted to include her aunt in the celebration, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. As the sun began to set, Juliana noticed Clara's car parked outside. Puzzled, she wondered why her aunt hadn't come in yet. Quietly, she entered the house, following the soft murmur of voices. The door to Fernando's study was slightly ajar, and Juliana's heart skipped a beat when she heard Clara's voice, laced with urgency. "Fernando, we can't keep this up," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "Juliana will find out eventually." Juliana's blood ran cold as she pressed herself against the wall, listening to their conversation. "I know, Clara," Fernando replied, his tone equally strained. "But I can't stay away from you." Juliana's heart shattered as she realized the extent of their betrayal. She felt a surge of anger and pain, her body trembling with the weight of the revelation. Summoning all her courage, she pushed the door open, stepping into the room. Clara and Fernando sprang apart, their faces draining of color. Juliana's eyes burned with fury and betrayal as she stared at them, her voice shaking. "How could you?" she demanded, tears streaming down her face. "How could you do this to me?" Clara's eyes filled with guilt and shame, but there was also a glimmer of something else, relief. Fernando looked devastated, but he didn't move to comfort Juliana. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive. "Juliana, Clara began, but Juliana cut her off. "Save it," she spat, her voice breaking. "I trusted you both. I loved you both. How could you betray me like this?" Fernando stepped forward, reaching out to her. "Juliana, please, let me explain." But Juliana recoiled, shaking her head. "There's nothing to explain. You've made your choice." Desperate to escape the suffocating tension, Juliana turned and fled the room, her sobs echoing through the house. Clara and Fernando stood in stunned silence, the weight of their actions crashing down on them. Later that night, as the reality of their betrayal settled in, Clara and Fernando made a decision. They couldn't stay, not after what had happened. The only option was to leave, to start anew somewhere far away. It was a coward's escape, but it was the only way they could see to avoid the fallout of their actions. They packed quickly and quietly, careful not to wake Juliana. As they loaded the last of their belongings into the car, Clara felt a strange sense of exhilaration. The guilt and shame were still there, but they were overshadowed by the thrill of running away with Fernando. As they drove away from the house, Clara looked back one last time, a mixture of regret and excitement swirling in her chest. She had betrayed her niece, but she had also seized a chance for something she had longed for her entire life. Fernando's hand found hers, and she squeezed it tightly, feeling a spark of hope for their future. Juliana woke to an empty house, the silence deafening. She wandered through the rooms, the reality of her abandonment settling in like a cold, hard weight. She found a note on the kitchen table, hastily written in Fernando's handwriting. "Juliana, I'm so sorry. Clara and I are leaving. We can't stay here after what happened. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive us." The words blurred as tears filled Juliana's eyes. She crumpled the note in her fist, a wave of despair washing over her. She had lost everything, her husband, her aunt, her sense of security. The pain was unbearable, a deep, aching wound that seemed impossible to heal. Days turned into weeks, and the shock slowly gave way to a dull, constant ache. Juliana tried to rebuild her life, but the betrayal had left scars that would never fully heal. She found solace in her friends and the support of those who loved her, but the shadow of Clara and Fernando's betrayal loomed large. Meanwhile, in a distant city, Clara and Fernando started their new life together. They lived with the guilt of their actions, but they also found moments of happiness and contentment. Clara reveled in the freedom she had found, the chance to live the life she had always dreamed of. But deep down, she knew that the cost had been high, and the shadow of their betrayal would always follow them. Juliana, though broken, emerged stronger from the ordeal. She learned to trust again, to find joy in the small moments, and to rebuild her life one step at a time. The pain of the betrayal never fully faded, but it became a part of her story, a testament to her resilience and strength.